Welcome to Out of Nowhere, where we talk with marketers, makers, and value creators about where they've been and where they're going next. Let's dive in. Today we're talking messaging and Marcom with Peep Laja from Wynter. They're a customer feedback tool for B2B brands.
So I have a failed SaaS company in my past, like 2009, 2010. I had a startup that didn't go anywhere. And so that's kind of been a chip on my shoulder. And so in 2019, I studied an agency, a conversion optimization experimentation agency that's still around now, called Spiro. But 6 years into running that, or 5 years into running that, I got tired of being a consultant, explaining the same thing, for the millionth time. And I had been a consultant at that time for 10 years, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And that's when I added on the e-learning side of the business. So basically, I added like a new unit inside the agency, selling courses, essentially, to teach people what we do, for selling to people who can't afford the agency. Today, that's companies called CXL. And that e-learning business today, it's bigger in terms of revenue than the agency, while having half the staff. So that is why I think a lot of people want to move away from agencies, because agencies are people heavy. And then, about 2 years ago, I stumbled upon this unsolved problem, which was, at CXL, I have like 90 plus courses, and each course has its own sales page. And I learned a long time ago that in order to improve the conversion rate on the landing page, you mostly focus on the copy. And so I was asking myself, okay, so in order to improve my copy on these 90 pages, what's wrong with the copy? And so I was wondering, if my ICP, if my perfect customer is on those pages and they're reading it, what are they thinking? Are they like, oh my God, wow, so interesting? Or are they like, which is it? Or what's interesting, what's boring? And then I tried to find a tool that will help me solve this problem. Didn't find anything. And then was like, oh, well, everybody has copy. Everybody has pages. How come this is an unsolved problem? And then it was like, I've been waiting for an unsolved problem for 10 years since my last startup failed. Like, ooh, this is a problem. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's an opportunity. So did some problem validation, did some solution validation, built an MVP. And then, a slight pivot, copy testing. Our MVP became Wynter, focusing on B2B messaging. And this thing has now legs, and we're making money. We have customers. And so I'm going all in now.
That's awesome. What are some of the learnings that you had as you're trying to validate your initial sort of idea on this? Were there a few things that you're like, okay, that's a little bit different than what I imagined, or were you dead on already?
The very first part of the problem validation was we just designed some mock-ups of what the UI might look like. And so I scheduled like maybe 30 interviews or so, whereas like half of it was doing problem validation. Hey, is this a problem? Is that something you ever think about? And then showing them the mock-ups, like prototypes. It's like, hey, what do you think? Would this solve your problem? And the answer was, for the most part, yes. And then they said, but I want it to work like this. I want it this. And so that basically created the scope for the MVP. Then we built the MVP and launched it to market. And the old saying of no plan survives first contact with the customer. And sure enough, we were completely wrong about who this is for. And my initial hypothesis was that this is for copywriters. Like, finally, they have data to work with. No, copywriters don't care about data. In fact, they felt challenged, like somebody can judge my work, otherwise, so, and also they don't have money. And two, I thought my second ICP is going to be a product marketer or a marketer at e-commerce companies, because e-commerce companies have a lot of product pages, a lot of copy to optimize. No, as soon as they ship, and I'm generalizing, obviously, as soon as they ship a product page with some copy on it, they never think about it again. And if I say, hey, you can make your copy better, it's like, well, it's not a problem. Not a top of mind problem. And as we were pitching it, B2B companies showed up. It's like, hey, we want this, but we have a very specific ICP. You know, I want directors of product from this type of companies, or I want HR managers. And we're like, well, but we have like consumers. Like, do you want men ages 25 to 50? Is that good? And it wasn't good enough. But then it was enough signal that we need to go to B2B and just change the product because they wanted it.
So it sounds like you were looking at some e-commerce brands who have huge numbers of SKUs and consumers, which is high volume, but maybe had a lot of similarities. A lot of the consumers probably shared similarities, but what you found is in the B2B, the smaller volume audience, probably not, they don't work in SKUs, but probably fewer offerings. But the differences between one buyer to the next was pretty great, to the point where they needed to have more nuances in the copy, and each transaction was very valuable. They didn't want to, the idea of missing a sale on e-com is not a big deal, but the idea of missing a sale on B2B is like, oh, it's so painful because it's so valuable.
That's right.
So,
and also,
it sounds like your original hypothesis was a good one, but maybe the concern wasn't there. Whereas in B2B, they're like, oh, we've been looking for this. It's a recognizable pain point.
absolutely. And what else? What else is happening in the background is that consumer research is a pretty established thing. Since the 1950s. P&G and everybody has been doing consumer research since forever. Whereas in B2B, this has not really been happening, especially in B2B tech in SaaS. Hasn't been really happening, and also because access to audiences, because everybody is selling to a title at a type of company, is just not available. All these panel companies that are around that give you access to audiences, they're all designed for consumer. So the consumer ecosystem is rich and competitive, whereas in B2B there's really nothing. And so that was like B2B companies even couldn't do their customer research. It was very manual and time consuming. So that was something we could build on. And then we found a new type of person, like the product marketer inside B2B, like who is, it's a new role. They own messaging, positioning, sometimes go-to-market strategy, and they have nothing in the tech stack. So it's like, well, here we are.
And people want that. I mean, every tech marketer I know they want to max out the tools that are available to them. They're looking for it, right? In fact, in some cases, it's not a problem. How do I solve it? It's like, what's my tech stack? Like, they're very, very easy to convince that there's probably a tool for it.
For
maybe
sure.
overly in some cases, like too many tools. But
exactly, the inflated expectations of like this. Once we get this ABM tool, our sales will
everything.
Yeah,
that's what the salesperson probably said. Do you think that there's other trends that are a wind at your back, or maybe a wind in front of your face? So that's maybe blocking you a little bit. But I feel like B2B marketers are starting to pull more tricks out of B2C marketing than they used to. That's my perception, is they're realizing that this stuff we can learn from the B2C marketers. We don't have to say, oh, it's a different world. That, oh, actually we can be a little bit of that too. Business people are consumers as well. It seems like that's a trend that I'm seeing. I don't know if you see that or not.
It used to be, market used to be like a couple of big players, but now, especially in SaaS, and over the last 10 years, since the costs of technology have come down and access to talent, we're all remote now, and access to funding, VC money, has just, exploded. That has resulted in, if we compare like 10 years ago and today, like 50 times more companies than there were 10 years ago. 50 times. It's a huge difference. So that means that a space that used to have, 5 big players, like let's take CRMs. Oh, it used to be, Salesforce and Oracle and, whatever. Now it's like 500 CRMs, right? And the lesson from B2C is that, well, how many jeans manufacturers are there? Like infinite amount. And the product is really the same. So it's a commodity product. And now CRM is a commodity product. And how is B2C selling it? Oh, it's a brand. It's like affinities and all these things. And now B2B is learning we can't win on product alone, because as soon as something works, they're gonna copy us, and then you need to win on brand, and then messaging is a big part of it.
The pendulum has swung. If you remember, like Web 1.0 had brands, and in fact, the brand preceded the product. And you get all these, like, people were throwing money. They were throwing money at the marketing, and then the bubble busts, and then everybody learned from that, and they're like, screw that. We're not going marketing first. We're going product first. And all these founders were like very focused on the product, and the product will sell itself. We don't need marketing. And then they took the pendulum swung too far that way. Like you said, there's all these new entrants, and they're like, well, how are we going to differentiate? Our stuff's not as proprietary as we want. Turns out that's where brand comes back in. And so now it's like it's matured now that we're on to the second or third wave, where they're realizing, like, you can't just the feature is going to get copied. So what can't get copied?
Or maybe a couple of days ago, on Twitter, Naval Ravikant, who's like the modern era sage, said that you need sales because marketing was not good enough, and you need marketing because your product is not good enough. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the gist of it, and just goes to show the time when Naval built his companies. He's a very successful entrepreneur. Was when you could win purely on product because there was not much available, right? So if you built a truly good product, you understood the user, you won. It was enough. Not enough anymore.
No, and people can imitate you very quickly.
Yeah.
So what's the thing that they can't imitate? And that's where brand comes in, and then brand leads to how you talk.
Yeah. Your audience, your all these things. So like my favorite example is like in the coffee bean business, which is a commodity product. Black Rifle Coffee is now huge. It's like a SaaS scale business. And they sell coffee to people who like guns and military, and and some other affinity notes in there, and extremely successful. They're not afraid to be who they are, and so they attract one group and repel the other group, which is where. And if you look at like email marketing tools, there's according to G2, more than 400 of them. They're still saying. Send beautiful email newsletters with our tool. Like your coffee beans,
Yeah. In the tech world, you don't want to admit that you have a parody product, because the culture is sort of so focused on, well, we can't be parody, so we have to build these things that are proprietary. But again, it's so competitive, and features can get copied very quickly. With Wynter, are there prerequisites that you feel like need to be met before they can take full advantage of the platform? Or can someone come in with just a very loose, evolving business strategy, no sense of positioning and value prop, and still use it effectively, and maybe eventually they'll go back and get those things in place? Or do you feel like you really need to have some prerequisites met before you start using this effectively?
No prerequisites to use Wynter, because really the idea of getting feedback from your ICPs, from your target market, I mean, that it's not complicated. You don't need any sophisticated strategies. Like, here's my pitch. Hey, target market, what do you think of this pitch? Does it resonate? Are you interested in it? And that can even be the genesis of your messaging strategy, where like if you sound like everybody else, and if you ask your target market, can you tell why I choose us and not somebody else? And they're like, no idea. Then it's like, oh, maybe we, need to think about these things.
Do you think that actually should be maybe one of the first steps? Is Wynter could be one of those very early steps, or where would you see it in the process? Like if you were trying to be objective and we're thinking through somebody who is in a very early stage, maybe even just have an idea, how would they use it versus somebody who's like Series A, has, obviously is done well enough to get to Series A? Like how would they maybe use the platform differently?
Well, I think, Wynter is not a replacement for having true insight into the market and spotting an opening in the market, and having, you've worked in the industry for 10 years, and then you just know why things the way they are, why the status quo is broken. So Wynter will not tell you like, hey, you should be this. What Wynter is validation, whether if you want to communicate it like this, do people get it? Do they want it? Is it relevant? Is it aligned with their priorities? Is it differentiated? So you and I, we've talked about message market fit. And so Wynter gives you a way to kind of like pre-validate it before you put something out to the market. So it's about speeding up those feedback loops. So here's a messaging we want to lead with, and before you start driving traffic or go to product hunt or whatever, you can see if like people get it, if they want it, is it relevant, is it differentiated, and then you based on the feedback you can make the pitch better. And obviously same goes for bigger companies, like big companies, which is most of the customers we have. Before any product launch, everything goes through Wynter first. So they want to get the messaging right before they put it out there.
And do you see people designating, hey, this is more of a top of funnel awareness play versus more of a down funnel direct response play, or are they maybe accomplishing everything all on the same page, so they kind of lead with one and then down here is a little bit more actionable? How do you think they're using it?
Are you talking about like home pages or
just how you see users using it right now? Do you feel like, is it mostly sort of down funnel direct response type landing pages, or is it you're seeing it all across the board and they're very aware of where they're at in the journey?
So overwhelmingly, most people are testing their home pages first, which I think makes sense because that's your highest traffic, highest visibility page. And different people have different ways how to think about it, and some buy into we should go all vision and our narrative, and then of course what typically that comes at the expense of clarity. People come in and it's like you're trying to do what exactly, what is this? So people forget that when we see something new, first thing people want to understand is what is this? So I always recommend like lead with a category. We're a marketing automation tool, or whatever it is. Explain what it is, and then people can relax. Okay, now I understand what it is, and now I can take in like the onlyness and the rest of it. So people use Wynter mostly for bottom of the funnel, like key pages before companies would use or browse before signing up. So your homepage, your different product pages, feature pages, sign up pages, pricing.
Yeah, your insight about the category, I think, is a good one. Why do you think it is that we humans want to see a category right off the bat?
I think it's evolutionary. Like this has been discussed. Any book you read on neuromarketing or things like that. It's our reptilian brain is not very sophisticated. So back 30,000 years ago, as soon as we saw something in the nature, we were like, what is it? Can I eat it or will it eat me? And so we're like, or can I mate with it? We're sizing it up. So we want to make sense of it. And so I think we haven't evolved that much since the.
Yeah, I would describe it as both category and positioning. There's a file cabinet in your brain, and you need to know which file cabinet you're about to put all this information into. And then from then on, once you got to get the right file cabinet, you got to put yourself in the right file cabinet, and it has to be an actual file cabinet. You can't just make up some crazy thing like, I don't have that file cabinet, I'm moving on.
Right.
And then from there on, it seems like every supporting message is like, all right, am I in the back of the file cabinet or am I at the front of the file cabinet? And you have to think about that. And
exactly. So I think of it in terms of like consideration sets or jobs to be done framework. Is like, yep. So if I'm looking for a CRM, this is a CRM, but I'm not going to consider you because I already have HubSpot, Salesforce, and so on in my back of my mind. But if they say, hey, we're a CRM for, I don't know, small bookkeeping shops, and I'm a bookkeeper. Oh, this is now different job to be done, different category of product, maybe number one in my consideration set now. So testing that, I think, is very important. And I think also, like when we talk about category creation, it is a good play or can be a good play. But if you say, hey, we're a revenue intelligence tool, and people are like, what? Then you need to have a lot of money and patience and time to do the customer education that over time to start getting what that is. And if you're a bootstrapped company, I mean, odds are that you just can't pull it off. David Cancel was from Drift was on my podcast, and he said it took them like $10 million to basically educate the market about conversational marketing.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, I think category creators are not positioning themselves off of something. They're just saying we are a thing. And so, if we're talking about file cabinets again, it's like, I don't have a file cabinet for that. But if you said, hey, you have a file cabinet for this, or we're this, that helps, I think, a little bit, right? Is position yourself. That's why you call it positioning, right? You position yourself as something or off of something, right?
Yeah. Exactly right.
What are some of the, I'm sure you're starting to hear like people give you feedback on, hey, this worked, and oh my gosh, we couldn't crack this. Are you starting to see some of that feedback where people are like, oh, before we had this tool, it was, stuff that makes you feel good and you pass on to the team?
So a surprising use case that I wasn't planning on is settling internal debates. Because
Yes.
if there's messaging or words that go on a website, everybody thinks that they can have an opinion because they can read and write. And so CEO wants to say one thing, and she usually wins. And the product marketing has another idea. Engineers say, hey, what about this new feature we just built? And so there's all this conflict. What should we say? How should we call it? And all these arguments. And typically, either they find a happy medium, which means that they really like find a boring, vague way to say something that doesn't, offend anyone, or they go with like highest paid person's opinion. And so Wynter is like, hey, let's say that we're a go-to-market research tool. And then with Wynter, you can find out people have no idea what a go-to-market research tool is, or everybody has a different idea of what that is. And it's like, maybe we shouldn't use that terminology. Here's data that shows that people find it very confusing. And most people like to think of themselves as rational actors, and nobody would want to push messaging that where we have data that this messaging is just not working. It's like not clear or whatever.
That's interesting. In terms of the results that people get from using the platform, are you trying to emphasize a high sample size, lots of different viewpoints on this messaging, or is it more of the richness of the feedback that you get from maybe even a small sample size?
Mm-hmm. So it differs based on the page and the goal. So the metric of how people measure success often can be conversion rate, because whether people sign up. Well, signing up is cause. Is effect, something that happened. But what's causing them to sign up? And so if the messaging achieves certain, matches certain heuristics, or like it's clear, it's compelling, it's relevant, it's differentiated. If those things are checked, people will sign up. So a lot of times, people use Wynter to get that feedback on like, hey, this is not clear. How can we make it clearer? What do we say first, second, or third? The information hierarchy is informed by actual target customer priorities and pain points. So if you have that qualitative input on those matters, then you can make your copy better on those in those specific aspects, which will result in more people signing up for stuff. But
Yeah,
it can be broader as a brand too.
It sounds like what you're saying is ultimately you want, let's say, conversion rates, right? Like you want to get a conversion rate that goes from X% to a better percent. And Wynter helps settle maybe an internal debate, get the messaging a little bit sharper, gives you an outside perspective that looks a little bit more like our audience. And then that if the job's not done, now it gets implemented. And then you find out, okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're closer now. And look, the conversion rate is inching closer to where we want to be.
And often in B2B, you only have like 150 customers, right? And so that means you will never be able to run a single A/B test. You just don't have the volume. And now you can at least go by qualitative data. There are no sample size requirements there. So sometimes it's the only thing B2B companies have going for them.
So you and I met over our shared belief in the term message market fit.
Mhm.
And I think probably it was one of those like things where it's like obvious to both of us. And not a lot of people use that term, but I know you and I both have championed it over the years. I think other people are picking it up. Have you are you seeing other people buy into that terminology, that thinking when you've used it? Is it an easy get? Like, what's your experience with it? Because that's how we met.
Yeah, I think it is gaining some, modest traction. I've seen iterations of it, like a language market fit, and which is the same thing. And while Winter is not for startups, like early stage startups, that's not the ICP I'm going for. I do have some, and so that is quite often the thing that they're trying to achieve. And so I have this one startup that testing their messaging and positioning with Winter, and this is a startup that just started, like brand new. They were able to find a pain point that was far stronger, and thanks to that insight, they were able to increase their pricing 10 times by finding message market fit. It's like, oh yes, I have this pain point and I'm ready to throw money at it. So yeah, it's happening.
That's cool. I mean, the terminology for it to me just made a lot of sense, right? Like product market fit, that term makes a ton of sense. You've got a product, you've got a market, does it fit? But you can have a great product and you can have the market nailed, but if you can't find the glue that bring the conduit that brings it together, it's not going to work. And if when I think about it, innovation on its own doesn't just sell itself. It doesn't get there. You need distribution, right? To succeed, you need innovation and distribution. You need them both. And sometimes people have like really weak innovation, but they're very good at distribution. That can be successful, right? And to me, if I think about distribution, well, that's a lot of things. It's sales, it's marketing, but the thing that they both need is a good message. I mean, you have to be able to communicate, oh, that's your need, that's your circumstance. Well, this is what we've got. And so to me, it just made a lot of sense. Like if we're going to champion product market fit, it's not that and you're done. There's another side to that. And that's where message market fit came in. And so message to me felt like the right word to use. And I'm sure it's the same reason that you also use that same word versus language, right?
Prerequisite to product market fit. Like,
yes,
they might want the product, but if you can't communicate it in a compelling fashion, and of course, if somebody has 30 minutes, I mean, I'm sure we can sell them on a bunch of things, but they don't have 30 minutes to listen to us, so making something concise yet compelling, something that resonates, that's hard. And yeah, you need to get there.
So since you started Winter, and you've obviously, this is not your first rodeo, it's your third or fourth, or at least that we know of, right? What has been probably the most like energizing and fulfilling thing about it? Like what, and I'm sure it's a work in progress, right? Like there's still things you're still working on and still going after, but like what has been like the stuff where you look back and you're thinking like, that's pretty cool?
Based on now, certain things are much easier. So first of all, most of the pipeline that is generated, like demos and stuff, they come through my organic social content. And it's not that my content overnight became so good. It's because I've been building an audience for the last 10 years. So I'm standing, on top of that pre-work. That makes it easier. So it's easier to find customers. And two is there are certain playbooks that I know that will work, content marketing. And I'm just don't mean the blog, but like content anywhere, like YouTube or LinkedIn, so content marketing works. So went all in with that right out the gate. And second is I know that many of my ideas are flawed and wrong. And so from the get-go, I built a very fast learning machine. So what I'm consciously optimizing for is super fast feedback loops. So for instance, just recently, what I did and still doing is somebody gave me feedback. Hey, you should sell into sales because that's closer to money. All these reasons why I should be selling into sales. I'm like, maybe really, but I need to do problem validation. So I need to what is the problem that the sales has that I can solve? Unsolved problem. And so basically, I lined up again a bunch of interviews with VP sales in B2B SaaS companies, and it's like, hey, this is what winter is. Do you have this problem? You know, kind of like talking about the problem and like, this is the way we would solve it. What do you think? And so before I'm going in and writing code and building product, I'm validating. So I'm, you know, able to learn very, very fast whether there's something to it or not. Same thing with new features. We're doing everything no code because I know how expensive is developer hour. Like if you spend, you know, a couple of sprints building a feature that nobody actually wants, very expensive. And so that has been, you know, easier because I know how to do things. Certain things are harder. 10 years ago, when I was younger, I had more brute force hustle in me. And now I have kids and I'm older and like I can't brute force myself to success anymore. Like I need to have other people help me execute.
Isn't it nice that we trade brute force for maybe a little bit more like, I don't know if it's wisdom or I've been through that before. I know how to better vantage point.
Totally. Like 10 years ago when I studied CXL, I mean, I was staying up at night and blogging, you know, writing articles, and I can't do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I see like, it would be great if I had, you know, more content, but it's just, you know,
it's a throwaway phrase to say work smarter, not harder. But damn it, some of us don't know how to work smarter right off the bat. So we have to just work harder. And then years later, you're like, you know what? Maybe I don't have to do brute force on this one.
Exactly right.